Welcome to DRAW-ology, everybody. This, I think, is episode 9, and I've really been looking forward to this one. The story that my mom tells, with really no prompting at all, my father will tell it too, is that I was very into drawing from a very early age. I would, draw holiday things or just things I saw in the yard, or I would draw Star Wars things. Here's C-3PO and R2-D2 about to get destroyed by a TIE fighter, I think. Um, and and the story my folks tell is that I drew so much and so often that they were able to wallpaper the entire kitchen with my creations, and that really never stopped. Kind of right up through high school. I was always interested in drawing and in illustration in particular, and for a long time I thought I was going to try and go to art school or design school. I was really into the idea of going to the Rhode Island School of Design for some reason. That was just my dream. But then I got into biological illustration. I started doing these very detailed pen and ink things. You can see this here is a two-lined salamander, and it's kind of hard to get the details from these pictures. I can't think of any other way to share my screen. Here's a spring peeper. You can see all these minute details, every little bump on the skin, every little last bit of pigmentation. I got really into the kind of verisimilitude of it. And here's a newt on sphagnum moss. I grew to hate sphagnum moss because I just felt compelled to draw every last little frond of it. And so I was really into biological illustration. And then I got into music, of course, and kind of put the drawing aside, though it started to creep back in to my musical life. I did ended up doing the illustration for my 2010 record, Little Vigils. This is not pen and ink. This is scratchboard, which was a new medium for me. But I had a lot of fun doing that. And then I started to kind of full on incorporate the biological illustrations in with things that are in my merch store. These are a couple of wood frogs that I put on the cover of my new book of essays. So I've been really into biological illustration for a long time, and I love children's book illustration. And I came across this picture in my feed several weeks ago by Lee Ferris Draws, and I just loved these pictures. And I didn't make the connection at first between the drawings that I was seeing and today's guest. So I want to bring in Lee Ferris here. He is one half of the rockin' soul duo Freddy and Francine, and he's also a kick-ass illustrator. And hopefully this will work and I can bring him in. Hey,
What's up, dude?
how you doing, man?
I'm really good.
Well, it's
It's
great.
really so good to see your drawings. No, it's amazing, man. I had no idea. Like you said, you were into pen and ink, but God, I'm like so on fire for that stuff right now. Like the super detailed stuff. That I love it. I love the biological stuff too.
My thing was pointillism, but with pen and ink, you know.
Yeah.
And God, just hours at the desk under like a very focused light with a tiny little Stettler pen or some kind of thing, just doing dot by dot by dot. And I would tell myself, like, if there was a stretch of black, I would be like, you can't just fill it in because it'll look different when you look at the finished thing. So I would just dot in the entire bit of black as I slowly went mad.
Well, yeah, it is totally maddening. I think patience is kind of like the bottom line for that kind of stuff, right? Like there are whole sections of drawings that I can see that I've done where I just completely, like I can just go, oh, I lost interest in my patients over there because I just was like, I have to move on to this other section so I can feel like I'm completing something as opposed to just being hyper focused in one area. So it, but as you know, if like you're gonna spend 8 hours on something, you might as well spend 10.
Yeah.
Like,
I love that. I love that. I want to back up a second. So we have like more in common than you realize. Of course, we have the music thing, and now we realize we have the illustration thing in common. Now, you of course were also, I don't know if people know about your former life as an off-Broadway actor, most notably as Carl Perkins in the $1 Million Quartet. I was in the high school musical, so basically the same thing.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing.
Now, if you tell me that you grew up playing tennis, I'm gonna get a little freaked out because we'd be like brothers from another mother. So
I grew up playing baseball.
Okay, all right, good.
Played tennis.
Okay, all right. Well, I part of the reason for this series was to kind of highlight the things that I'm into and that I'm curious about and that I'm interested in, and maybe that people wouldn't get a sense for from my work as a musician. And I certainly had no idea that you were into pen and ink and into illustration. Can you tell me which came first? Was it the drawing? Was it the singing, the songwriting, the acting? Where did you start?
It's a good question. Singing was very first, like 5 years old, singing at Christmas time, Christmas carols, that sort of thing. And then I started playing piano, but then I didn't really start. I got a guitar when I was like 16, so I started pretty late. But up to that point, I was singing in choir and kind of playing piano, but I didn't really know how. I wasn't writing, so it was late in high school that I got into the guitar. My grandma got me a guitar, which was really sweet, and I just played that thing like in the same way that you're talking about pointillism. I think I discovered what I would later realize was like my mental illness very young. My obsession to learn that kind of stuff is like out of control, as many of the people on this feed could probably attest to.
Yeah,
and relate to.
So you weren't drawing during any of that time?
Okay, dude, I started drawing. Bianca and I were talking about this last night. My partner Bianca, in 2016, is when I started drawing.
Wow!
And I had doodled like very minorly, very abstractly, like just in class or whatever.
Yeah.
But I always loved art. I always I would go to museums. I would be inspired by it. It would help my music. But never ever really thought that it was going to happen. I got sober 7 years ago, and I do think in a lot of ways that this was like some sort of gift that was just waiting to like show up in the midst of that sort of clarity,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But now, to me, it has been rather mystical. But I do entirely just give credit to the internet. I mean, there's no way I would have been able to, even in any other time in history, been able to like delve in as much as I can, and anybody can with the internet.
Right, and as an adult, I mean, so you're kind of doing this with the zeal of a relatively recent convert, whatever 5 years now. I mean, that to me, now you had a kind of artistic running start in other media, but I find it's comparatively rare for adults to kind of get into this sort of thing to the degree that you have. I mean, if you put a piece of paper in front of a kid and say, draw me a picture, paint me a painting, there's almost no kid that wouldn't do that. Same thing with getting kids just to join you in song. They're very quick to kind of join in the creative process. But this is something that's kind of come up in previous episodes where it's like, for whatever reason, through whatever combination of factors, unfortunately, sometimes that kind of gets either drummed out of you actively, or it just kind of falls by the wayside as you get distracted by other things. It's really hard to find that space as an adult to create and to go into a new medium where you may not know if it's going to work out. It's like, how do you say, like, I'm going to spend 6 hours now on something that may turn into nothing? It's like you don't normally have that luxury. We might now in the middle of a pandemic, but 5 years ago you didn't, you know. So that's amazing that you came to it so late and have kind of been making up for lost time, it seems.
Yeah, I completely have experienced that as like a guitar teacher. You know, like adults, just we get into a groove of thinking. Usually, it's ego related or pride related, or like perfectionistically speaking, like, oh, I can't draw anymore, or I never drew when I was a kid. Like I know that about myself, and I still deal with that process. Um, but I've learned not to listen to it as much and just keep barreling through, because if nothing, like drawing and now I'm doing watercolors, to me there is something, because it's entirely my own. Like I could just be the introvert that I really know myself to be, as opposed to like a performer who has to kind of get into that mode and work toward being on stage and performing. Yep. Like I can just go inward and live in that space, and it's really joyful for me. I still beat myself up, I think, probably more than needs to happen in like anything I do artistically. But I think you're absolutely right. I think it is hard to start things later in life. I have a friend who he's been Mavis Staples' bass player forever, and he just quit right before kind of all this happened. So it's not really, everyone's out of a gig. So, but he did it for 15 years.
Wow.
But he's a horn player, and he was first a guitar player and bass player, but he didn't start playing horn until he was 36. And he's like, and now it's within the same discipline, right? Music.
Yeah, sure.
But he's ridiculously great. Like he played with Tom Waits, and he played with, and horn is a very different thing, right?
Sure.
And I think I always have looked up to him in general, like as a musical mentor and friend of mine. But really, like, I think of him as an example of somebody who kind of just was fearless about that.
Yeah.
He's like, it took me 2 years to learn how to get a good sound happening before I felt like I even wanted to play through full tunes, and then the idea of like performing or playing with other people. So, yeah, and I think also the pandemic, kind of the last thing you said, has allowed me more time maybe than I ever would have expected to just do this all the time.
Yeah. So, now you've alluded to this in what you were just saying, but like, has drawing been? I mean, drawing allows you. It sounds like drawing allows you to reach this kind of mental space that maybe you can find through other things. But I mean, it's as opposed to gigs where you got to go out and find a gig and get in front of an audience and to find that time out of mind. I mean, drawing, you can just throw down a page on the desk, get your pens, bam, you're drawing, and you're like the god of the page. You can control what goes on there. You can control what doesn't go on there. It's a very comforting kind of thing. It's this like, it's this practice that it sounds like you can get to a mental space through that thing that maybe, especially right now, that you might not be able to get to, like, you know, other ways. Would you agree with that?
100%. No,
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, there's, like you're saying with music, there's so many factors that have to come into play to allow us to get to that place.
Yeah.
On stage, usually on tour, right?
Sure. And acting too. I mean, to be an actor, to get into a production, I mean, there's a whole crew, there's a stage, there's lights. It takes a lot to get to the point where you can do the acting.
Absolutely. And then you're doing something, in my case, stuff I've done theater-wise is repetitive. So you're doing the same show, same part every night. And so trying to get into the flow of like, of flow, right? Like that's kind of the free play of what we're all doing as like improvisatory, even if we've done it 1,000 times, kind of meditative art, right? Like that's kind of what I'm going for. Drawing is far more immediate and meditative. immediately. Like,
Yeah.
but there is, like, in comparison to acting, we can just pick up a guitar in a quiet room and just get there.
Yeah.
Like, and I think all those things are like, all those different things that I've done or that I love to do quiet the mind. I think more than I've maybe ever really understood, and maybe the drawing is helping me to understand that, is this idea behind, like, oh, I don't have to actively sit down and practice meditation, which I've done in my life a lot, where I can more so, like, drawing allows that it happens almost immediately.
Yeah.
And I'm not thinking of anything other than what I'm doing, but I'm also not, like, actively thinking. I'm just in the thing. And
Totally. Do you feel freer to experiment as a visual artist than you do as a musician? I mean, maybe because there might be fewer expectations. I mean, people might have an idea of what Freddy and Francine sounds like, or how Lee Ferris sings. But as an artist, like, people may not be as familiar with your visual art. Like, do you feel like you can you're set loose in a way?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I haven't figured out any real consistent way to make money with this, and it hasn't really been my it hasn't been my goal. And so that being said, I have the freedom to not live up to any sort of expectation. Like, once we make the choice to be like Mark Corelli, who writes songs in his house for his friends, to like full-time life, and then we build up all of the momentum that you have to get to a place where you're just constantly bringing in income from that, it loses its purity, but it becomes something new. It's not negative or positive, but the freedom certainly gets changed.
Yeah.
This is like, I'm gonna fucking try whatever I want and see what happens. And and I do have a lot, like, I do this thing where it's like, I don't know, I do it with songs too, where I really want to finish things. I've always been somebody who doesn't like co-writing or writing by myself or something and not finishing something. I walk away very frustrated if so. So I try to look at every drawing as like that idea, but I'm learning, like, forcing myself to take time and just go walk away from it 2 days, come back. And so some of the frustration for me can sometimes be that it's just not, it's going to happen. I mean, when you're not making any money doing something that takes, as you know, doing pointillism and pen and ink, that takes so damn long.
Yeah.
It's hard to do it all day long.
It can be. It can be. Was pen and ink your kind of entree into this, or did you start with sketching, pencil, or was it specifically pen and ink?
I think I just started with pencil. I started looking up stuff on YouTube and whatever, and just kind of like seeing things resonating with me. It came out of it's really weird. So you were talking about Scratchboard for that record cover you did, and there is something about pen and ink that almost does etch the paper depending on the paper you're using. Like where's my I have my pens here. Like,
that was one of my questions. What kind of paper?
I use a rapidograph.
Oh yeah.
So, like, super fine tip. There's no way to like really show that, but
and hard metal tip kind of thing.
It's a steel tip, right?
Yeah.
And then also, then your classic, like, fine liner, like a felt tip,
I got
kind of a thing, right?
Yeah.
These start to be a pain in the ass because you run through them.
Yeah.
Like, one drawing will, depending on how, if you're detailed,
there
are people who can, just really make a statement with a small amount of things. Mm-hmm. I'm a detail guy, and I like just getting in there, and so these things just kind of die. But the latest thing I've been doing is fountain pens, which is a whole new deal. Like this is a super cheap one, like $4.
Yeah.
And it's kind of cool because I've been doing watercolor with these, and they're not waterproof ink. So the water hits it, and it just starts to kind of turn into its own thing. And if you can surrender to that, it's really cool. If you're like, oh shit, there goes my idea because it's blurred, like smudged everywhere.
Now, do you have some examples there that you can show us? I know this is, we should say, like, people should follow you. They can see better on your profile. This is imperfect kind of camera thing, but.
Yeah, I have, okay. So I don't know if you can see.
Oh, yeah.
That.
But that was on your page.
Yeah, these are also ones that are mostly on my page. I think I only post the ones that
yeah.
Yeah,
man.
But this is like, I consider this kind of like, there's a grid in pencil that I lay out. Have you ever done like an isometric perspective is what it's called?
Got me.
And what you do is you just lay it out so that there's these like help lines for perspective. The thing that I like about perspective is it's almost like creating like a magic trick.
Yeah.
It's a two-dimensional, it's a flat piece of paper, but we can see so much depth with perspective. So there's these like where the city blocks are would just be a pencil line. Mm-hmm. So as long as I kind of like generally follow in that direction, it's the same thing going this way. Yeah.
Now, is isometric perspective where like the lines, the perspective guidelines in the rear of or the foreground of your drawing are they further apart than they are in the distance, or are they similar? They parallel?
So that would be isometric is parallel.
Okay, so that's what it looks
like. Creates this like bird's eye view kind of a thing.
Got it.
Everything is like further away from us. Trying to see if I have like a one. Here's a watercolor that has one point.
Yes. Yeah.
So everything here
goes to that.
Everything is going to that. So that's 1 point perspective.
Yeah. Yeah.
And actually, this building coming down here would technically be there would be another if this is the horizon line, like where the eye would be if we're standing there.
Yeah.
This is a vanishing point, it's called, and then way down over here off the page is another point. And that stuff of the geometry of it all is actually what gets me most excited. I don't know why, because I'm not like I don't like music theory too much. I'm not like I'm not like a math guy, but there's something about if you nail those things, how the eye goes, oh, that's a real thing. That's
Yeah, and you can play with it too. I mean, like an MC Escher or something like that. You can kind of, once you master those things, you can start to tweak them in really interesting ways. You mentioned something about adding watercolor. It's funny because about half an hour before this, I don't really prepare very much for these things as a choice. But one of the things that I had to ask you about was that addition of watercolors into black and white is a very orderly, precise style, and it's by and large, I think, kind of forgiving. I mean, you have to commit to a line, but you can often kind of go over it and kind of bend it to your will if you make a mistake or something like that. But once you start to add color, and particularly water colors, I mean, it must be such a wild card. And you were saying that earlier. It's like, okay, here we go. Like, is this going to do what I think it's going to do or not?
Yeah. Oh, it's very, very much like you just kind of get up to the cliff and you just kind of throw yourself off. You're like, whatever effort I had in, however many hours I had in, could just go away.
Right.
But there are different ways to do that I'm worried. I mean, this is brand new since pandemic that I've been starting watercolors.
Yeah.
And yeah, man, it's like learning. I took like a $10 class on this, just on basics of like sketching, architectural sketching, just meaning like seeing a building, draw it, and then this is how this person paints, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't even gotten close to like recreating that idea, but I think that the surrender of it, of just being like you can you see a wet one technique, for example. You wet the paper, right?
Yeah.
You wet the paper just with water. And then you take pigment and paint on a wet brush, so it's like wet on wet.
Mm-hmm.
And you allow it to just kind of, you just start moving it around, like for like a blue sky or something. You can get so many different, like, you know, this actually looks more like I took the brush and moved the brush area everywhere.
Yeah. Yep.
Where realistically, or in other things, like you can just take the water itself and just like tip the paper around. And it's a super absorbent, like if you get watercolor paper.
Watercolor,
yeah, and it'll just kind of start to show you what it wants to do, which I like that. I like, and as you can see, like this is not the most crazy detailed pen and ink thing. It's like I just like did it in pencil, and then like where there would be shadows, I went in with the fountain pen and like hit darker things.
Yeah,
you know.
What nice? So the fountain pen you're using on the wet paper to create the shadows, or is this the fountain pen?
So like in this situation, you would do the whole thing in pencil, like a pencil sketch of it. And then like the more detailed places, I mean, I can nerd out on all this stuff, but so like, you know, the rule of thirds thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Like when you look, so like we don't really know these things. And this is the part that I really nerd out on. Like when you look at an image, you read it like you're reading a page in a book. Like your brain does that, whether you know it or not. And so
that's why I said yes. Yeah.
Right. So the rule of thirds is that you have, you know, vertically and horizontally 3 sections per direction. So our brains want, whether we know this or not, want the most detailed and, you know, the focal point of the image to be at one of, like, if you know, when you on your iPhone or your whatever you use, you do a grid for cropping and it gives you it's just like that. You want one of those grid spots where it meets to be the most detailed or the focal point. So in this case, it's a yellow building. So what I did was I just came in with the darker, like more permanent ink, and I just made those little areas, you know, I outlined them. So these are in pencil.
Yeah.
And this is detailed. That's just something that is like from looking at YouTube and like going, oh, that makes sense.
I love it, man.
Yeah, that it's like trying. You know what? I look at a lot of this as similar to mixing a record. Like there's so many different layers, right? Especially with color. You lay down like a wash, and then you're gonna have shadows, and all of it is attempting to bring into focus one element. You're like, I just really want those background vocals to have more, you know, of attention in this little spot. You don't just raise the volume of them; you have to carve away, right? With like everything else, and I'm not a mixing engineer, but I've been around and mixed my own records and stuff with people who do and done some mixing. So I kind of look at it as like very similar, like philosophically speaking. Like the idea is the same.
I love that, man. I feel like that really hits upon this idea that resonates with me, which is that if you are a creative person and if you're kind of really committed to a kind of creative path, that you can transfer it to any number of media, any number of endeavors. And you know, you may not mix something the way that like a award-winning, you know, mix engineer would do it, but you might actually hit upon something that is kind of like your own unique take on this and is the right thing for that little moment in the song or that particular track. They're transferable skills, within the arts. In previous episodes, we've talked about how you can transfer them out of the arts. Like for me, science involves a lot of these same kinds of skills, this kind of focus, this kind of creativity, this time out of mind, this kind of trying to figure out how you push certain variables out of the experiment or control for them so that you focus in on that one grid point that you want to examine and focus on. I'm fascinated by how transferable and how kind of across the board these skills can be applied.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to put it. That it's transferable. I think that goes to why maybe I just did this a couple years ago or whatever.
I love it.
I kind of see a lot of things like most of life artistically or creatively. Mm-hmm. And the flipping the switch of like, okay, it's time to do the dishes. What I would rather be doing is drawing or like living my life as an adult.
Yeah.
But I can at times like achieve that similar sort of flow in wanting to like make whatever task is in front of me a creative thing.
That's such a great way to put it. I mean, for me, and I think you probably have felt this too, that creativity, whatever you're doing, it's such an inherently optimistic act. I mean, the universe tends towards entropy and things falling apart and disorder, and to create something is to kind of state your intention that, okay, I'm going to try and momentarily fight back against this entropy and this disorder, knowing full well that it's going to fall apart at some point, like it's going to so it's this, and then I'm going to do it again, like another song, another painting, another day where I try and make something happen that didn't happen yesterday. And it's this inherently optimistic thing. And I never really was able to kind of verbalize that before this time that we're in now. But, and I don't always feel, I'm not always like, we're not talking about a simple, like the sun is always shining if you want it to be kind of optimism. It's like, it's an optimism that you have to fight for against the tendencies of the world and against, as you were alluding to before, like the tendencies we have in our own heads and our own minds. Like it's a struggle, but it's coming from a place of optimism.
It's really heavy.
Yeah.
Right. No. Like in the best sense. What struck me when you were saying that is this idea that as a songwriter all my life, I've always said, like, songs don't exist except for the medium that we listen to them in, right? Like, ones and zeros is really all they are digitally, analog or whatever, but really, even if you've got a vinyl, there's no song there without the record player. Right. And then the record player allows it to live into the hearts and minds of people, but still it's not really there. Right. And so there is an infinite sort of nature to that, to the song as a concept that sort of is more transcendent than all things, right? It's like it takes another human being to truly experience it, even though if you're playing by yourself, whatever, you can have your own experience. But especially in the context of commerce, like, where is a song? I can never figure out the answer to that song or to that question. But in this case, these things are real. These things are sort of like the emotional thing that someone gets from looking at a piece of art is not real or tangible. It's very real, but it's not.
It's not tangible. Yeah.
But the physical paper is, and it in and of itself then becomes far more impermanent in the moment, because if you just burn it, you can lose it. You can, the song concept at once, especially like you put something out on Sound Exchange or TuneCore, and it's kind of forever going to be there.
Yeah.
It's like so different how these different physical or like metaphysical to get super silly about it all. I mean, like like mediums affect us differently as the person creating.
Sure.
It's
Sure.
a cool. I'd like to do all kinds of creative things with the rest of my life, like major projects. I'd like to get into bigger, crazier things. Like
yeah, I feel like there's an opportunity for you in this. Maybe it hasn't come yet. I mean, it's a bit of a side gig for you, right? Like I've seen like T-shirt designs or illustrations you've done for other artists.
Here
you
in
were talking
Nashville,
about
yeah.
you were talking about not having made money from it or serious money from it yet, but like it's akin to music. Like right now, because the technology is so enabling, you can you can get three chords and you can go up on in front of the world basically and put it out there. That's not necessarily the most helpful thing for the world or for you. Like I think it behooves us to kind of learn a certain bit of the craft, and some of that you can only learn from doing in front of people, but a lot of it you can just kind of chisel away at in your bedroom or at your drafting table or wherever you're drawing. So I think this process now, this whatever 5+ year process you were talking about of just like getting into it and kind of learning the fundamentals and experimenting, like that's huge. And I feel like if it's something that you wanted to pursue, I feel like those bigger projects and that bigger exposure is kind of out there down the line somewhere waiting for you with this. It's not a reason to necessarily do it. It feeds a thing that needs to be fed, and that's why we do these kinds of things. But I'm really excited to see where this takes you, and I'm glad that I stumbled upon it.
Yeah, man, and I'm really grateful you did. I find people's interest in it seems to be so consistently like positive, and I'm very grateful for that. Like because I am in, like you're saying, I don't want to just have my three chords and throw it up on the internet. I really do have a lot of pride in what I do as a musician, and because of the time it takes to do these things, the people who I respect who have drawn and done a lot of amazing fine art and stuff like that, it takes a lot of time and effort, and so I do feel like I want to make sure that I'm up to like a standard that I would even before I put it on Instagram.
Right.
But because I do see it as like that's now our business card. If you're gonna do these sorts of things for bands or for whoever, like I've done T-shirts and stickers and posters and whatever, it's like I want it to be quality, and I want to know I can recreate it to some degree. It's not like just some happy accident that I fell upon.
Yeah.
So yeah, I am open to. This is kind of like a classic like journey thing that I don't think I've ever been able to like get into with my music. It's more like I've kind of put my own control over a lot of my musical career, and like if I don't just constantly, you know, work the business side of things and intentionally, go for like go for goals, then nothing's going to happen. This is more like the process is pretty damn satisfying.
Yeah.
No matter what.
Yeah, the music, there's a machinery there that you kind of, especially living where you do in Nashville. I mean, even if you're not like part of the like star maker machinery, you can see the machinery. It's plainly visible, and I think music kind of that it draws you into that machinery, whereas kind of doodling and illustration, at least to me, maybe there's a machinery there that I don't know about, but it just feels like it's more amenable to that kind of like process of self exploration and kind of meditating with a pen in your hand, kind of thing. And it can turn into something bigger or more lucrative, but to me, the machinery doesn't seem to be as kind of obvious as it might be.
Right. There's definitely agencies and
sure.
Like I've looked up people who I see on Instagram who are so incredible, and like, oh, okay, you're represented and doing the whole New Yorker magazine. You know,
Yeah.
you're in that world.
Yeah.
I have no like intentions of breaking into that energetically. I just don't have the energy to even try. I don't.
Yeah.
But,
yeah. That brings me to something I wanted to kind of get around to towards the end here. Like, who are some illustrators that you kind of follow that really actually, I was going to ask you who inspires you, but this brings up a question. Do you are you now a fan, or were you growing up a fan of people like Richard Scarry or David McCauley? Like,
I don't know David McCauley.
Oh man, David McCauley is this. He does these books.
Or maybe I do.
You might have seen him in grade school. He does books called like Castle, where he does these
children's stuff.
It's children's stuff, but it's like pretty sophisticated.
Right.
He did these books called How Things Work, where he illustrates everything from.
I love those books.
So that's David McCauley.
No way.
Yeah. So
I'm gonna Google it here really quickly, just to. Man.
Yeah, he's amazing.
Was huge in my life when I was growing up. My mom's still a preschool teacher.
My mom was too.
Weird,
crazy. She's retired now, but yeah,
that's crazy. I had no idea.
Those early kind of Richard Scarry books, those kind of bird's eye views of the town, like with that first illustration you put up, it reminded me so much of those kinds of things. Like, where's that little worm guy? Like he must be in somewhere.
Yeah, man. I'm looking at Castle right now, and I remember,
right?
Yeah, that stuff. Mill. And it takes you through the whole thing.
You got to check him out. Like, who else? Another guy for me, who I think he was a New England guy growing up, was this guy Elmer Rising, who did these amazingly detailed. He'd draw like an abandoned kind of falling down barn, and you could see every little piece of the grain of the wood. It's kind of remarkable. Like, who else are you into? Who are you into? Like, if we wanted to kind of go and follow some folks on Instagram besides Lee Ferris Draws, who should we follow?
Well, there's a guy who has a lot of books online. I have actually. This is a workbook that he did. This guy's name is Alfonso Dunn.
Okay, Alfonso Dunn.
And he's like an educator, probably more than anything. But his pen and ink, he's like a classic pen and ink guy, like black and white, super graphic style. Like, so what you can't achieve with color, you kind of have to make up for in detail, right? So that's his ability to capture like figure drawing with like a dip, nib pen. I mean, I can just watch him all the time. There's a guy out of New England. New England has a lot of really great like barn drawers, right? Because of like
draw what you know, man.
Draw what you know, right? There's a guy named Gene Matras, Matras.
Okay. Who
is like a farmer most of the year, and I think he only draws in the summer. He told me once. Like I met him at a flea market where he was selling his stuff, and he's the one that turned me on to the rapidograph pens. But he's like, I didn't know quite who I was meeting. Like, he's a New England illustrator guy. Like, people know who he is. But his stuff it was just like, he'll just do like, you can buy a print. It's like a rectangle of just a row of trees, like, 6 inches by 9 inches. And the detail is so insane, like, you just feel like you're there. Yeah. And then recently I've been getting into, like, with the watercolor and stuff, there's a guy named Matthias Adelson. He's a Swedish guy. Yeah. It's just the best. Like, so detailed, but also hugely creative and whimsical, and like has this character that he's made of himself that he then sort of inserts into the whole world that is always there, kind of thing,
like Waldo. Yeah.
He's like a Waldo-like character, but it's like far more just more out, and And so there's
those are great tracks.
Yeah, endless. It's endless.
Yeah. Well, man, I don't want to take up too much of your time because you should go draw something probably.
I'm probably going to do that today.
I hope so. And we should put a plug in for Freddy and Francine's upcoming record, I Am Afraid to Die. Is that that's coming out in September? Is it? Or
comes out? Yeah, September 24th.
Oh right, man! I can't wait. The tracks that I've heard, there's some stuff released in advance off of it, and it sounds great. And
Thanks,
we were hoping to up here in the fall for a show in my neck of the woods, and I know all that stuff's kind of on the chopping block, but we'll make it happen at some point. And until we can see each other in person, this was a wonderful break. I appreciate
it. Yeah, man, I really appreciate your interest, and this is a cool thing you're doing, and I'll try and tune into the next one.
Yeah, man, if you got ideas for who I should talk to, I'm all ears. I'm kind of reaching the bottom of my bag of tricks, but the DRAW-ology was a moment of inspiration, and when you said yes, I was like jumping up and down. I was like, awesome. That's a new idea that just worked out.
Dude, you gotta send me some text pictures of your drawings. I want to see those. Really
Will do. All right, man. Great to talk, Lee. Thanks for joining me. Give my best to Bianca, and we'll see you soon.
Right on. Be well, dude.
All right. Take care.